Welcome to Growth Beyond Boundaries, the podcast by the Astra Coach Alliance that explores the transformative power of coaching, leadership, and innovation. I'm your host, Andy Huckaba, and I'm so excited to have you join us. Here at the Astra Coach Alliance, we believe growth isn't just a goal, it's a journey. Whether you're a leader striving to inspire your team, a professional seeking your next breakthrough, or an organization ready to transform your culture, this podcast is for you. Each segment, we bring you stories, strategies, and insights from our team of seasoned coaches and leaders across industry. Together, we'll discover innovative approaches to fostering a culture built on success, accountability, and collaboration, rooted in both challenging and compassionate coaching practices. So if you're ready to go beyond boundaries and discover what's possible, you're in the right place. Let's get started. Today, we're stepping into something we all know too well, but rarely feel comfortable with: uncertainty. Whether it's in our families, relationships, work, the economy, politics, or the state of our world, uncertainty touches every corner of our lives. It disrupts our routines, rattles our confidence, and leaves us feeling off balance, like the ground is shifting beneath our feet. But what if uncertainty isn't just a threat to manage, but an invitation to grow, to lead differently, and to reimagine the possible? I'm joined today by two thoughtful, experienced coaches, Phyllis Collins and Teresa Schwab, as we explore how uncertainty shows up, how it affects us neurologically and emotionally, and how we can respond with curiosity, steadiness, and presence. So let's get into it. Hi, Teresa and Phyllis.
Hi, Andy.
I want to start you off with a question. What is a metaphor or story that describes what you experience in uncertainty?
I'll kick us off. Several years ago, right after I graduated from my master's in social work, my husband and I took a 3-week vacation in Europe. And we were in Switzerland, and we had taken a gondola ride to the top of a mountain. And we decided, instead of taking the gondola back down, we were going to do a hike back down. And it was a paved road, and they told us it was going to be really easy for us to walk down this mountain back to our hostel. And we started walking, and we kept walking, and we kept walking. And about 3 hours into this walk, we turned to each other and said, are we in the right spot? Like, there was no end in sight. We hadn't seen a single human being in that 3 hours. And we had no idea where we were. This was before cell phones. So we had no cell phone. We had no map. All we had was just the word of the people at the top saying that this road will take us back to where we need to go. So we were so far in at that point, we couldn't do anything else. So we kept walking. We walked another couple of hours, and it started to get dark. We still had not seen a human being. We saw no end in sight, and we had no choice but to keep going. And that's what I think about is in uncertainty. It's like somebody told you that this is the way to go, or this is where we're headed, but there's no real path. And there isn't a lot of help necessarily, because other people are either absent or they're not in it with you. And it starts to get dark and murky. And you get so far in that you don't really have any choice but to keep going. And turning around, isn't an option. So that, to me, is really descriptive of what uncertainty feels like to me. And it's such a scary feeling when you're like, there's nobody to turn to, and the only person that you really have to rely on is yourself and your partner. And there's nobody there that has any expertise because they just aren't there. So that's what it feels like to me. Phyllis, your face.
Interesting story. Yeah.
Well, I'm thinking you're here right now, so you obviously
we
found
made
where
it.
you were going. But I'm thinking, I hope they found where they were going.
We just kept going, and it was probably, I don't know, 7 or 8 hours that we walked down this mountain. It was a long haul, and we just had to trust. We really just had to trust that at some point we were going to get where we needed to go and that we weren't going to be somewhere completely different. But yes, we did find it. It just took a long time.
Well, let me ask, because it probably will come up in this discussion, I'm thinking. So I'm assuming that path did actually lead you to where you were going. You did where you were supposed to go. So it was true that that path was going to lead you there.
Yes. If
And
I remember correctly, this has been a long time ago, but if I remember correctly, we came out pretty close to where we were supposed to be. So yes, but all we could rely on was just trust.
Mm.
well, here's another question. Because of the uncertainty, did you ever think about veering from that?
Oh, we
path?
thought about everything. We did. Yes, absolutely. Each time we stopped, we were like, should we turn around? Should we go back? Should we take another trail? But there really weren't any other trails. And so you're constantly, I think what you're asking me is what's the experience like in the middle of it? And it's, you're constantly assessing and reassessing. And you're also constantly questioning yourself and looking for other options. I think it is a process of continual assessment. What are my other options here? If I find myself in a really bad position, then what are we going to do as a backup plan? But there was no backup plan. There were no people and there was no other path. It was like high mountain on one side and it was a big steep drop off on the other. There was nowhere to go. I think what we took solace in this particular scenario was it was a road. Like it was paved. It wasn't forested, it wasn't thick. It was a paved road. Even though there were no cars on it and no people, it was at least paved. So there was a little bit of certainty.
It has to go somewhere, right?
It has to go somewhere. Yes.
But I'm thinking again of a question of that uncertainty also may have been created because of lack of information, in that they probably knew it would take 8-9 hours, but maybe forgot to tell you that tidbit of information. So that's why they were so certain. Oh yeah, you'll get down. But you not being familiar with this created a lot of uncertainty for the two of you, because they didn't necessarily indicate it would be dark in
Right.
9 hours.
Right. And I'm guessing they navigate mountains all the time. So
Right.
what we thought was going to be a straight shot to the bottom of this thing was, clearly not the straight shot to the bottom. And of course, we had no water, we had no food. Like we weren't prepared for that, like in any way, shape, or form. So I think that added to the uncertainty. But again, I think there's a point where you're just as far in as you'll ever be out. The only way you've got is through, and to trust the road and trust the people that told you that it was going to take you somewhere. And that was really the only option. Does it feel like, I'm just curious, does it feel that way to you? Like, what does uncertainty feel like to the two of you when you're feeling uncertain?
I would say two things, and none of these things have ever happened. But I know the thought or the feeling that I get is either just not that I pass out, but that there's just I'm in a room of all white. So my answer isn't there. So it's like looking at a white sheet of paper, but really it's almost like a whiteout, a storm of a whiteout, where all you can see is this whiteout. So you really don't know what to go. I don't feel like I have, in the instant I feel it, I don't feel like I have even a path to go, and even to turn around is only going to lead me to more white space. So it's like there's not an answer out there. That's what I think my mind does to myself. Even when I settle in, I think when I start to see my way, I feel like I'm on a deserted island. I know I'm on a deserted island. I can see all the water around me, or at least that's all I can see where I'm standing. And I know I don't have any survival skills. So but I know I want off that island. So at some point, I better develop some, but I feel at a loss at that particular moment of, okay, I'm here. I know where I'm at, but I don't know how to get somewhere else. And I don't know how right now to even use the resources that may or may not be around me. And that's what my mind feels like.
Yeah, I was just thinking among these three stories, and Andy, you probably have one too, is fear. Like fear, both of your scenarios sounded really scary to me. That white room without being able to tell what's up, what's down. If you turn around, you have no idea of what direction you're going. All three of those stories have an element of fear in them. Andy, how about you? How does it feel to you?
Yeah, so in the introduction, I used the metaphor of feeling off balance, or like the ground is shifting beneath my feet, but not being steady, if you may. Another metaphor that I often use is sometimes it feels like stepping off a cliff. And I reflect back to many years ago when I started my business, leaving the corporate world and starting my own business. It felt like stepping off a cliff. It was like, okay, is that step going to be solid? Is it going to be soft? Am I going to fall? What do I do if that happens? I have the benefit of being not being a worrier, so I don't worry that much about that. Perhaps I'm just too cocky and I believe in myself too much that I believe I can recover from any of the missteps. And I think life has kind of shown me that. So I trust in that a bit. I liked your association with trust, because I think that when we are in uncertain situations, and I would suggest that we're often in uncertain situations, that our ability to trust in ourselves, in the environment around us, in our training, in our knowledge, helps us. It assists us in getting through those uncertain times. So that's kind of what I think when I think of this idea of uncertainty.
Yeah. Go ahead, Phyllis.
Another theme I hear, spoken and somewhat unspoken but implied, is a sense of aloneness. And Teresa, even though you were with your husband, you never saw anybody else. So it was the two of you against the trail. And in mine, both are like a sense of aloneness. And Andy, even if you step off a cliff, it's rare that a group steps off a cliff.
Sure.
It's like,
well, we're asking ourselves the question, what's going to happen to me?
Right.
And so in a way, I suppose it is kind of aloneness in that. Good observation.
Well, and I think earlier in the description, you were talking about the neuroscience and what happens to us physiologically. And in some cases, if fear is the response, our main instinct as a human being is to protect ourselves, is to stay safe. And if we're not feeling safe, then it makes sense that we would be asking ourselves that question, how am I going to survive? And what should I trust? What feels like that it's solid, that I can trust it in this moment so that I can make the best decision? Because we move into self-protection when we are uncertain or fearful.
Yeah, so thanks for leading into the neuroscience stuff. There are some key concepts around the neuroscience of this topic that we're talking about, uncertainty. Number one, the brain craves predictability. Our brain craves that. We crave the safety. We're wired to seek out patterns and predict outcomes. Number two, when there's uncertainty, our amygdala, our primal brain, is activated. And that's the part of the brain that is responsible for our fight, flight, or freeze reaction. It's the part of the brain that keeps us safe oftentimes. And, or at least that's the story we're telling ourselves. And so when there's uncertainty, the amygdala kind of kicks into play. When we start to try to logic through this and think through the possibilities, we have the potential for our cognitive load to get overwhelmed, to get fatigued, because there are too many possible scenarios and outcomes. There are some dopamine hits that make us feel good. Uncertainty disrupts this reward loop. So we feel good about knowing what's next. We feel good about the predictability. And that gets interrupted when there's uncertainty. And then we also, our brain has the ability to adapt. The neuroplasticity of our brain has the ability to adapt, and we can learn to tolerate these areas of uncertainty in a better way. And I think this all informs our coaching kind of in a very interesting way, that is, we see people struggling with uncertainty, or as we struggle with uncertainty, that we realize some of the things that could be going on here, and that there are steps you can take to also deal with this.
Yeah. Well, once your amygdala gets hijacked, it also cuts off your source of creativity and innovation. So that part
Right.
of your brain that can be creative and do creative problem solving isn't as online. And that's when we need it most. So I think you're leading us to what are the strategies? Like, what can you do when you're in those moments, when your amygdala gets hijacked, when you're in fight, flight, or freeze, to bring your brain back online to your prefrontal cortex so that you can make logical decisions in uncertainty, which in and of itself, I think logic for some people in and of itself can be something that they can trust. Right?
Right.
We like to trust that part of us.
Phyllis, what do you do when your amygdala gets triggered, you feel uncertain? How do you manage that?
One thing I will say that I have been trying to do, and it's been very recent because of some recent circumstances in my life, and it truly is to just stop and intentionally slow down my thought process. To even stop and say, am I really in a white room with no information? And it is almost like that. It is what I'm thinking or even visualizing or experiencing. Is this true? Am I really on a deserted island with no resources? Because even on the deserted island, there are resources. I may not know what to do with them yet, but there are probably some resources there, if nothing else, to maybe eat, drink, and shelter myself until the next phase of stop. What's next? So really, I have consciously had to say stop, recognize truly what is and what isn't in this time frame. And my hope is, and I would say it has worked for me recently, is taking stock of what part is true that you can work with, maybe not even get answers of certainty, but that will move me towards certainty, and what is truly of no use or not real at all. So that's one thing, is just to try and slow down all that brain activity that has been hijacked, really. Because again, there's no such, well, I'm not going to be in a white room anytime soon. And I think if I'm going to be drugged there, I would start to know I'm being drugged into that white room. but it's really just slow down to try and get the brain to slow down with you.
Yeah. It's that some people use the word pause, the stop. Other people will use the term step back.
Right.
Or step back from the situation. I know KLC to a certain extent talks about getting on the balcony to be able to see what's going on the dance floor. So it's really it's a changing of perspective, correct?
Right.
Yeah.
And you have to, I think, do it intentionally And if you feel that alone, and if you are literally alone in the moment, you'll have to intentionally think, what can I do? Or intentionally know when my brain has been hijacked, stop, slow down. If nothing else, that is the first step. If you're with a group of people, or if a whole group is there, we might have to do that for each other.
As we recognize other people who are having a meltdown or
right.
or
right.
freaking out or in that fight, flight, or freeze mode, that we
the
can
old TV
potentially
show,
help them out. Yeah.
As sometimes I'll say this when I more training than coaching, but I always remind people of a certain age. Remember the movies back in the day when that uncertainty gripped you and then your brain was hijacked and they used to just slap the people? And it's like, again, there are consequences to that today in today's workplace.
However, good thing we're on Zoom.
Right. Right. But it's almost like a non-physical slap is what your goal would be. Like you said, how can I get myself and or others to just shift a perspective? And that may even mean physically, let's go take a walk. Right. Let's go to another room. Can we take a break? Asking some questions on behalf of yourself and or the group if you see others struggling with this.
Yeah, I've seen the technique where people go, okay, what are 5 things that you can see right now?
Mm-hmm.
And they're 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. What are 4 things you can hear right now? Right. I don't know if I have them in the right order. What are 3 things you can smell right now, and 2 things you can touch right now? And so I've seen people use that technique to slow people down, to do that pause or that stop, to get them out of that reaction mode and more into the thinking mode, the prefrontal cortex.
Mm-hmm. I was just thinking during COVID, I did something similar, but it wasn't quite so analytical. If you've ever seen the movie, I don't remember if it was Finding Nemo or if it was the Dory movie. I can't remember which, but Dory in the movie is, I don't remember what she's trying to do in the scene, but basically she starts singing the song to herself, just keep swimming, 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 just keep swimming, swimming. And I found myself during COVID, I would walk around the house to that tune, singing, just keep breathing, breathing, just keep breathing, breathing. And I don't know how it happened or how it got developed during COVID, but there was so much uncertainty and nobody knew what was going on. And we were all living in that uncertainty at the time. I would notice these weird things that I would start to do, but it was exactly what you're talking about. It was to interrupt all of that fear and all of that stuff and just remind myself, take a breath, and it just was a tune that comes into my head, and I've noticed that I've started doing it recently. So I'm not sure that what it says about me, but I also do a lot of, when I notice it, I will go for a walk for sure. Like it's the first thing. I like get outside, get some fresh air, get some sunshine, take a really nice long walk and interrupt all of that stuff really helps me. Or I'll go to the basement. We have a workout machine in the basement and I'll do a really nice long workout. Both of those things just give you enough space where you aren't engaging your brain, you're really engaging the muscles in your body. So you're not spending as much time worried or thinking or in that loop where you can sort of get out of it. So I think, box breathing are some really good strategies. You breathe in for the count of 4, hold for the count of 4, breathe out for the count of 4, hold the breath at the bottom at the count of 4. They teach that to emergency professionals. And I feel like if it's good enough for a police officer, a firefighter, it's probably good enough for me. So some of those breathing techniques too can help you just regulate that nervous system. So your heart rate slows down and then in response, the rest of your body can slow down too. But I think interruption, what you're saying, Phyllis, interruption is really key.
What you're saying, I think though, if we were to just put a label on it, would be to say when we become more intentional, that allows us intentional to do the box breathing or the walking around or the stepping back or the breathing or whatever the case is. That intentionality moves us from that fight, flight, or freeze mode into the more thoughtful processing kind of mode that we can begin to sort it out and solve problems and be creative and look for possibilities, right?
Absolutely. And all of that. And I think prior to that, there's a little bit of self-awareness that's needed, because there are a lot of times that you're in the middle of it and you don't even know that's what's happening. You're just responding, you're reacting, and you're just, I sometimes describe that as like being jerked around by a bull with a nose ring, and you're just being jerked around by those emotions. So there is some level of self-awareness of learning about yourself, what happens to you when you are fearful or uncertain. What are those thought patterns? What do you tend to do? Do you react? Do you lash out? Do you shut down? How would you even know that you're in it? Because sometimes we just know we don't feel good. We feel emotional. We're fighting or fleeing or whatever we're doing, and we don't necessarily even know that we're in a response where we can be intentional. So I think that intentionality is incredibly important. And we need to do some learning, I think, about ourselves too when we're experiencing it. And this is where a coach can really be helpful, is to say, what was the experience like? What were you feeling? What were you feeling in your body? What is it like for you when you get triggered and you're in this space, so that people can start to learn, like, oh yeah, like, I've had people say things like they get red starting from their stomach, and the redness literally physically will start to creep up their body, clear through their face. I've heard people say their head gets hot, their legs pump up and down, like there's all kinds of like physical reactions that start to happen. And I think that self-awareness becomes really important when you're trying to be effective in your role, before you can even get to the intentionality that you're talking about.
Teresa, you took the words right out of my mouth. As soon as you started, I said, she's going to that self-awareness, because we all implied that not implied. I think we start to recognize this. Others may not. And I think even those questions are the ones. Even after the fact, if you were coaching, even after the fact, it would be, what was your first thought or reaction to this uncertainty? Even if it was to freeze. Because they may not have even known they did that, or they would after they had a step back. But going forward, I think it might even be a matter of pay attention to an action thing could be paying attention to when you are in moments of uncertainty. Pay attention to what's going on. Because like you said, if you don't know what's going to happen, it's harder to be intentional. But if you start to see the pattern of, again, I see my hands are balling up. I see white space.
Yeah.
I'm starting to sweat. I'm looking down and can't lift my head up. It's bodily clues or even mental clues to pay attention to over time, so you can make that intentional move.
Yeah.
I think that's also why in a group, it's good to watch for other people to help them to help them get out of that fight, flight, or freeze moment.
Yeah. In our coaching, I would suggest that coaches, especially us, not to be too proud here, but we're kind of masters of uncertainty. We live in uncertainty often, right? Because when we are engaging with a coaching client, we don't know where they're going to go. We don't know what's going to matter to them. We don't know the solution to their problem. We may not even know what their problem is. What are we certain with? Well, we're certain with our methods, our training, right? We're certain about that. That's predictable. We know what that is, but we're not necessarily certain with the outcome. And I think that's kind of an interesting connection into coaching, that we indeed live in a world of uncertainty with every engagement we have.
That's really good. And it reminds me of that saying, trust the process. I love it and I hate it at the same time. I just hate it when people say trust the process because you can't anoint trust. But at the same time, there's a lot of truth in it. If you have a good process, you can lean back into the process. And I think that's what we do in coaching. As coaches, you trust the coaching process. You trust yourself as a coach to utilize that process with folks, so that you can get to some meaningful place that they define. But this might be another strategy too in organizations, or to create certainty, is to, instead of worrying so much about outcome, spend the time designing a good process. Make sure you know how you're going to go about decision making, the way that you're going to come together, the way that you're going to interact with each other, the way that you're going to support each other. And by creating a really good process that people trust, even in uncertainty, they can lean back into that process. And it's like, I find sometimes that sort of trust the process thing is a lot like, it would be a lot like skydiving, which I have never done, and really don't want to do. But I imagine it being like, you've got to trust that thing is going to expand and it's going to bring you safely to the ground. You are out there careening toward the ground at breakneck speed, and the only thing between you and death is that parachute. And in some ways, that's what the process is like. You're sort of careening and have no sense of direction or where it's going to end up. But if you have a really good process and you can take a breath and lean into that process, I think that can help with uncertainty.
So I want to use a different term here that I think is saying exactly the same thing you're saying. And we talk about it often, that I'm certain of the container that we are creating, myself and the person I'm coaching, that container of trust, that container of confidentiality, that container of kindness, that container of caring, whatever. The pieces that are part of that container, I'm certain about that. Now, sometimes it takes the client some time to become certain of that. But, that's part of our work, right? And so when we talk about trusting the process, to a certain extent, we're trusting the container we're creating for that work that we're doing. Another way to look at it would be, and I've heard this many times, trust the training, that we all go through a significant amount of training and it never stops. It just keeps going. So trust the training that we have to create that container and allow for that environment to be conducive to growth for the client.
Yeah. Well, that reminds me of athletics. All three of my boys are athletic, and my middle son is a college athlete. And we talk about that a lot. He's in a scary sport, but there's a lot of times we just talk about, like, trust your training, muscle memory, trust what you're doing. Don't overthink it. Just go out and have fun. When things are scary or uncertain, or you're feeling a lot of pressure, that idea of, like, just trust that you've done the work up to this point and you're not going to learn anything new today. Just go have fun. And I think that takes some of the pressure off sometimes, to just trust that I've done the work and trust that it's there, even though I might not know where this is going and it seems a little scary. I know I've done the work up to this moment. And that's another way, I think, Phyllis, to get that sort of space, is to just tell yourself, I've done the work.
I was going to say, and as we as coaches trust the process, we've told this to the clients early in the process, but I don't know that they always hear initially until you reach this kind of an uncertainty, but also to allow to coach the client to trust themselves. Because again, the answer will lie within them. we're not there to give them the answer on what to do with the uncertainty. But, and I know a question I like to ask is, especially if there's I just don't know, because uncertainty implies you just don't know. You don't know what to do next. You don't know what to do. So it's well, what do you know? And because they come to the table, but again, if their brain is hijacked, they've forgotten a lot, they feel like they've forgotten a lot, but they know something. Getting them to even trust themselves, or wondering why don't they trust themselves, but having a trust conversation even about them can sometimes be a way to handle uncertainty. When I have worked with clients, they know something, and oftentimes what they know, and I'll go back to my deserted island. The one thing I know is I don't know how to swim in an ocean. And so I know my route would never be to do like what's the Tom Hanks movie?
Yeah, with the volleyball.
When I've seen that, every time he starts
Wilson,
to build when he starts to build that boat, I'm like, okay, that would never be my way of escape. If I'm going to succumb, they will find me on the island someday. I know for certain swimming my way out of this or building a boat is not going to be my way out. That I know for sure, because that one seems even more dangerous than standing on the beach or on the cliff or wherever I am. But do I know I have to find water? That could even just start me walking, or doing something. But it's like, what do you know? What do you know? And what do you know for sure? My first thought would be, I'm going to build one of those signs on the beach for anybody that's going to be my first building episode. But it's something about, something, and don't forget what you know.
You have resources. What are the ways to access the resources? Yeah.
What are they? Who are they? Yeah.
So we've been talking about how do you address uncertainty, and we talked about the idea of stop or pause or reframe or whatever, right? But what are some other tools that can be used in our work with clients, or for the clients just themselves? What are some ways to address uncertainty when it appears?
We've been talking a lot, I think, more about individually, how we handle uncertainty individually. And I was thinking about, like, how do you support people within an organization, or when they come together and they're in groups or teams? How do you support, when you're leading a team, how do you support them through uncertainty? So it's sort of layer upon layer. It's not just the individual uncertainty, but then it's the uncertainty of the environment that you're in. And I was just reading an article this week with Harvard Business Review. It was published in May, and it was actually entitled "Questions to Ask in Uncertainty." And these questions I thought were super powerful, because what they do is they offer a group an opportunity to change their perspective. So by asking questions or getting really curious about what you're experiencing, asking questions can help a group generate a new way of looking at something. So these questions were, what decision today will still make sense a year from now? So it allows you to get out of the fear of the moment and put yourself a year into the future and think about, okay, so if we weren't in uncertainty at that moment, what would that decision look like? So I love that question. The second one was, if a year from now, that decision was used as an example of our leadership, what would it teach? Again, another example to just pause and take another perspective. And then the third one was, what if this isn't the storm? What if it's the climate? And I love this question, and I'll tell you why. I'm working with a team right now, and I meet with them this week, and I'm actually going to ask this question, or I'm going to have it in reserve to ask, because it's a team that's uncertain, but they're operating within an incredibly uncertain environment. And they keep waiting for the uncertain environment to get stable so that they can build the team. And I suspect the environment and what they're hoping for is actually the way that it is. It's the climate. It's never going to change. So the question then becomes, how do you operate and become effective even when this is not a storm that passes? This is the new reality. I love this question, so I'm going to use it this week. And then the fourth question was, what's the cost of waiting? So especially if you're trying to make a decision in uncertainty, which is something that comes into my coaching all the time, especially with the political climate, the economic climate, tariffs, the unpredictability about knowing how to build a business or supply chains or how to bring things to fruition in an environment where we have no idea what the impact of tariffs are going to be on business. And people are sitting around with these teams of people who are looking to them to make some decisions and provide some certainty. And if I think in that moment of trying to make a decision, this question, what's the cost of waiting, could be one that, again, could give you a really interesting and different perspective, sort of get you out of the moment and think about, should we just risk right now or should we wait into the future?
I would add another question, and it's similar to the one I posed earlier about, well, what is it that you know? What do you know? It would be, what then is in your control right now? Because that tends to play off of what do you know now? I mean, what do you know right now? So what is in your control right now? And I think the purpose of all of those questions that you asked, Teresa, and the one I posed, and Andy, if you want to add some other questions, is it gets them thinking forward, like the one about the year from now. It just has them start to look beyond. It's what can you control right now implies there's more to come, but let's get settled with shoring up ourselves and then looking ahead.
I think that's a great recognition that forward looking pulls us out of the emotion of being uncertain and into the future thinking of what are the possibilities. And that forward thinking then allows us to be more creative, more thoughtful, less worried, because we do have control over our thoughts, right? And we do have choices and possibilities that are out there, and often we wouldn't think of those lest there be uncertainty. And so uncertainty then becomes almost a springboard into possibility there. What do you think about that?
I love that. Status quo is comfortable. And like you said, our brains like predictability. Our brain likes things to be the way that it was before. It likes to notice and recognize patterns. When we can interrupt that, or we can interrupt the status quo, that's really where the birthplace of innovation happens, is in those moments of uncertainty. But we have to be willing to tolerate it and embrace it in some ways and ask ourselves, okay, this feels really uncertain and I don't know the answer, but what's possible here? What could we learn in this moment that can actually propel us forward? So I think it is the birthplace of creativity and innovation if we can be curious, ask some questions, get out of that emotional state, and start asking ourselves, that is the status quo really what we're striving for anyway? Like, status quo shouldn't always be our goal. Sometimes safety and security is what people need, but for creativity, innovation, progress, especially in a world like ours that is moving so quickly and is so uncertain, status quo is really not the best goal anymore. We've got to get better. And I think the circumstances are requiring us to get more adaptable, more flexible, more willing to let go of status quo, to lean into what's possible. I'm not sure that's our default. And it's hard when our brains are working against us in that way. But I've always felt like growth only happens in discomfort. If you're not uncomfortable, you're not going to leave status quo.
Yeah.
It doesn't
I
mean
think
it's easy or doesn't mean it feels good, but there is possibility there.
one of the first things that always comes to my mind on knowing how fast we are able to adapt in uncertainty is just the concept of Zoom during COVID. I think I had paid for my Zoom account prior to COVID, but I don't think I was using it except for like kind of some of my non-work meeting activities. I don't know that I was using it for a lot of real work. And just how fast, because Zoom was around. Now it's elevated now, but just how quick we thought, well, we've got to meet somehow. And there again, Zoom was always there, but did people use it really? Were we really engaged? To now, it's just an everyday thing. I laugh now, even when I still see 5 years out, people walking behind us. I still think that I get a kick out of that now, 5 years out. But the thought of this uncertainty, how are we going to meet? Everybody's at home. We can't get together. What are we going to do? And it's like, okay, now that we are in a forced situation of uncertainty,
right,
we found Zoom real quick. Right. And adapted ugly. Like I said, we had babies, cats, kids, all kinds of things going on in the back until we got it together. People getting comfortable being on camera, but we adapted. That's just something I always think of, how we adapted ugly pretty fast to where now that's that possibility that now Zoom is a whole other thing now. It has products and services that, I don't even know that, well, I do know that I'm not using them all, but that uncertainty led to the use of something that was already there. And how often is the answer somewhere, but we have to, again, get our minds wrapped around it to either search for it or to access it.
I wrote down a few things as I was considering this podcast today. One of them is I made a connection between uncertainty and predictability as being opposites, or predictability and certainty are essentially one and the same in terms of the way I'm looking at it. And I asked the question, if we could predict everything, what would our life look like? And the emotion that I felt was, wow, that'd really be boring. If we
boring was the first word that came to my mind too.
And boring. And you all know I love a little bit more predictability, but boring was also the first thing that came to my mind. So
fascinating.
That's 3 for 3 on boring.
And then here's another thought that I had as I was thinking about the opportunity in uncertainty. What if uncertainty is a portal, not a problem? A portal to new solutions, a portal to advancement, a portal to growth.
When you say that, it makes me think that the best organizations are preparing people for that kind of a mindset, because you can't tell people that when they're fearful. So, if I'm already fearful or I'm in uncertainty and I'm already in that fight, flight, or freeze response, and a leader or somebody in the company comes to me and says, oh, this is an opportunity, I'm going to go poo-poo. Like, it's just going to make me mad. It's going to feel condescending. I'm going to go further into fight, flight, or freeze. But if I've been conditioned to believe that to be true, if our culture promotes the idea of this all the time, then when it happens, then I'm going to be open to it. So it makes me think, absolutely. And then maybe the possibility in all of this is, how do we prep our cultures in organizations, our families, our communities to really think about change and uncertainty as possibility versus something to be feared?
No, this brings me back to the coaching container and how we use the coaching container to look at possibilities, look at other ways to address something. It's kind of like Michael Bungay Stanier says, that question, and what else? type of question, right? What is that question that we're asking that when people feel uncertain or they feel stuck or they're looking at things in a binary way, win or lose, right? And all of a sudden, as a coach, we begin to ask those questions. What other options are there? What's another way of doing this? And what else? And what else, right? And all of a sudden, they expand into some thinking that goes well beyond this binary thinking of winning or losing or surviving or dying or whatever their mindset is. And I think the coaching container is perfect for this because we can ask those questions. We can nudge and encourage, and hopefully they want to play the possibility game. People we've coached for a long time understand that is one of the benefits, to just begin to toss out possibilities of ways to move forward, which then creates a little bit of fun, some creativity, and for them, perhaps a little certainty that they're resourceful enough to come out with a good answer.
And how many times I think this happened to me twice today. I'd be curious how many times this happens in coaching conversations for you when these kinds of conversations happen and then people are like, oh my gosh, I can't believe the answer was so simple. Like this makes so much sense. How come I never thought about this before? And if you're in fight, flight, or freeze, or you're not looking at possibility and you don't have a partner to ask you questions, we just stay in that same story. And you open up just a few questions and suddenly they start processing and thinking, and they light up in that creativity and innovative space in their brain. And then all of a sudden they're like, oh, well, of course, this is the answer. Of course, this is what I need to do. Why didn't I think of that on my own? Just like, you just needed a little space. You just need a little space.
They're going to say, well, if I was in charge, and oftentimes they are, but if I was in charge, here's what I would do. Okay, say more. And then they start to think, well, why couldn't I do that? Or some version of that. So like you said, if you keep them talking and with an open mind, Teresa, going back also to your question about how can an organization encourage that more as just a normal part of their business. And just going back to one of those principles of Kansas Leadership Center of just having a mindset of acting experimentally. We don't know if it's what we're going to do is going to be right, but what would prevent us from acting experimentally at manageable risks? So we're training our mind to even do that. I think AI is maybe even an example now of the world with uncertainty, like where's this going to go? Who's in control of this? Who's running this? How do we protect these kind of laws of copywriting, blah, blah, blah. And I'm starting to read more articles on here's how your organization can start to play around with AI. So it's more of an act experimentally on small things that are exercising your brain to be there when it's a bigger issue. But you've at least exercised that muscle of acting experimentally without really knowing how it's going to turn out.
Phyllis, it so warms my heart to hear you talk about AI, and I think that's great.
I'm teaching myself. I have to listen to myself sometimes.
Yeah. So as we close, what's one truth or image you're holding on to in this season of uncertainty, this discussion around uncertainty?
I'm going to go back to the first two that we started out with, almost, of being more self-aware. And that would be, for me, it would be a challenge I would make to coaching clients and to organizations, being self-aware and then intentionally interrupting, whether that be pause, stop, reflect, take a step back to help move us forward. So we don't stay in that hijacked mind, individually or collectively.
And I'm going to go to trust because I feel like we talked about this weaved in and out of all of our conversation today. The lack of feeling of agency or ability to impact it, but just tuning back into trust, whether it's trusting a process, whether it's trusting a partner, whether it's trusting yourself, whether it's trusting your training, whatever that is, trusting the container, whatever that is, trust feels like something that you can fall back into. It's like a safety net when you're falling that can catch you instead of falling and hurting yourself on the ground. So I'm really loving this idea of trust and thinking about how foundational trust really is to managing uncertainty. What about you,
So
Andy?
the image that's sticking in my mind is the path. So I'm going to go back to your story earlier, Teresa, this idea of the path. The path is there. There are times when the ground feels uneven or shaky to me, but that's in me. That's not the path. The path is still there. And there are opportunities and possibilities that can take me to where I need to go. So I'm keeping those images in my mind as I think about when I deal with uncertainty. Well, thank you for the wonderful conversation. To our listeners, we'd love to hear your feedback on when you feel uncertain. What do you do? And how do you combat this tendency to allow the amygdala to just take control? What are some of your methods that allow you to step back, take a breath, sort it out, be more creative, look for opportunities, and so forth? So thank you for your time. We'll talk to you next time. Thank you for joining us on Growth Beyond Boundaries. We hope today's episode gave you the inspiration and tools to push past limits and achieve meaningful growth. If you enjoyed this episode, we'd love for you to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with your network. Your support helps us reach more people on their growth journeys. Remember, growth starts with one step, one conversation, and one decision to go beyond boundaries. Until next time, keep challenging the limits and discovering your potential. See you soon.